Hi, everyone, and welcome again. Another episode of GaudiumEtSpes22.com Podbean podcast YouTube video. I am very, very pleased to have on the show today a repeat victim of the podcast, Dr. Daniel Drain, former student of mine from DeSales University, got his PhD then at the JP2 Institute in Washington, D.C. for studies on marriage and family. He now runs the office of Shimmy Shang Shimmy something or other, marriage and family life, something or other. Is that his marriage and family life for the Archdiocese of Philadelphia?
Life and family, but
Life
none
and
of these titles
family.
cover it. Yeah.
Life and family. Also, adjunct professor, teacher in the School of Theological Studies at St. Charles Borromeo Seminary in Philadelphia. And I mention that also because that particular program is run by my beautiful wife, Dr. Carmina Magnuson Chapp. And you probably see her more often than I do, Danny,
That's right.
for
She's
that
my
very
dean. It's
reason.
my lunch buddy. It's great.
Yeah, no, she's awesome, and we'll put a plug in for it right now because what it is, it's the School of Theological Studies at St. Charles Seminary in Philly, which is the theological degree that the seminary offers for non-seminarians. So permanent deacons, lay religious of sisters, and lay people of all kinds, and so on, getting their master's degrees in theology, and my wife runs that. So, welcome to the show, Danny.
Thanks, Dr. Chapp. Great to be back.
Or I should say, Dr. Drain, the great Dr. Drain, DD, Dr. Drain. Anyway, I do have an announcement. I want to say two things. First, to my loyal to my loyal podcast listeners, I have four more podcasts lined up and scheduled after this one with Dr. Drain, and then I am going to be taking a much needed break from podcasting. There might be a podcast, an odd one here and there, but I am in desperate need of buying time to finish my book on modernism for Ignatius Press. It was actually due in December of 2025, and I got a phone call from the various people there say, "Where's your book?" And I had to say, "It's not there. I've been too busy podcasting and having fun and moving and all that sort of stuff. Also taking care of my parents out of Nebraska, my elderly parents. So it is time for yours truly. I actually hate writing books. I hate it, but I am going to do it, and I will write this book. The other thing I wanted to remind people is that I hate to do this because I hate begging for money, but we are still involved in our fundraiser here, and we still are in grave need of about $10 or $15,000. It's something people I don't know who don't run podcasts don't understand. Something as simple as the paying the platform fees and so forth. The costs associated with my podcast and my blog every year are about $4,500. And I don't have $4,500. My wife and I are Catholic workers, after all, and we do not have a lot of money. And also, we are opening a food pantry, which requires renovations, and we're well short of the money needed for that. So, if anybody with deep pockets out there still wants to contribute to our fundraiser, please do. I'm begging you. I'm on bended knee, hat in hand, out to the general public. Be great if somebody could, donate $5 million. That would be great. I don't know what. Please don't. I don't know what I'd do with $5 million, to be honest with you. Anyway, we are here today to discuss Dr. Drain's article called "My Hosanna Has Come Forth from the Crucible of Doubt," subtitled "Unbelief and the Atonement." It's related to Dr. Drain's doctoral dissertation, which we'll probably talk about at some point, which is really a dissertation on Hans Urs von Balthasar's concept of the role of finite freedom, the dramatic nature of the relationship between finite and infinite freedom in the theology of Hans Urs von Balthasar, and the manner in which that plays out Christologically, especially with regard to the cross and atonement, descent into hell. So I'm assuming this article was an offshoot of your dissertation, Dr. Drain?
Certainly related to it. It was a chance to, well, I didn't get to include Dostoevsky in the dissertation, so it was time, it was a chance
Yeah,
to
I
sort
mean,
of play with Dostoevsky and As a matter of fact, I was teaching a graduate seminar on atheism one summer when I was at St. Bernard's, and this kind of came about through my reading of the assigned text engagement with Nietzsche and de Lubac and Dostoevsky.
Oh, and this is right
At
in
a
my
double.
yeah, my real wheelhouse as well, which is why it immediately caught my eye. By the way, I would be remiss if I didn't point out that this article is chapter 10 in a book, an edited text of various essays called The Mystery of the Atonement, which is edited by Margaret Turek. For those who are watching on YouTube, there is the cover of the book. All right, it is put out by Humanum Academic Press. Once again, The Mystery of the Atonement, edited by Margaret Turek. And to remind people, Margaret Turek had a wonderful book on the atonement that came out a few years ago from Ignatius Press. And you will find my YouTube podcast video with her in the archives of my blog. So if you wanted to check that out, go look for it. But Margaret is absolutely genius on this topic of the atonement, and I was so glad she included this article of yours. I'm going to begin by you mentioned Dostoevsky. So at the very beginning of this chapter, you quote you quote Dostoevsky's defense of his, in a sense, steel manning of the atheist argument of Ivan in the Brothers Karamazov. And in response to a critic, Dostoevsky says the following, which you quote, the dolts, D-O-L-T-S, the dolts have ridiculed my obscurantism and the reactionary character of my faith. These fools could not even conceive so strong a denial of God as the one to which I gave expression. The whole book is an answer to that, meaning all of the Brothers Karamazov. Continuing with this quote, you might search Europe in vain for so powerful an expression of atheism. Thus, it is not like a child that I believe in Christ and confess him. My Hosanna has come forth from the crucible of doubt. And so this quote actually forms the nature of the title of your article. And of course, that caught my eye immediately. So, maybe you could sort of nutshell the basic argument that you're putting for. Why? But before we do that, what motivates you to write on this topic? That
Yeah,
to me.
sure.
Go ahead.
Um, I mean, I like every other undergrad who gets forced into it was deeply troubled by, a brief foray into Brothers Karamazov and the scene of the Grand Inquisitor. But the chapter before that in the Brothers K is this more philosophical debate between uh, Ivan and his other brother. That really, before setting up the portrait of the Grand Inquisitor, lays out the problem of evil, lays out the
Yeah.
problem of evil. Um, well, let me put it this way. I had engaged in a reading of all of David Bentley Hart's work because I was trying to figure out a way to respond to his book, That All Shall Be Saved. Because the first two or three times I read through That All Shall Be Saved, I was utterly convinced by it. And I didn't know,
Yeah.
I
Me
knew
too.
that I should think he was wrong. And I didn't know why he was wrong. And the reason I didn't know why he was wrong was because I saw that Hart had seen something to the problem of evil that I hadn't yet explored, that he had gotten on the other side of a mystery that I hadn't like really yet trouble me in a deep way. And his source for that is Brothers Karamazov, is Ivan,
Yeah.
is this idea that Ivan, if he comes to learn at the end of all things in the eschaton, that this is what Ivan is troubled by, that if the mystery of innocent suffering has a logic to it, has a purpose to it, if children suffered innocently for the sake of something else, that is what he says no to, which is a very different kind of objection than what you'll typically. Everyone has a problem with the problem of evil. Why do bad things happen to good people and good things happen to bad people? Ivan, there's something far more deep going on here, which is that um, he's he wants to reject a relationship with God if that relationship is based on the suffering of others. Which immediately, once you hear that, you're like, well, hang on, that sounds like something I should do too. Is he more Christian than I am? So anyway, that sort of the literary relationship is that Hart's perspective on theodicy, on the question of evil, is based on this Dostoevskian perspective. So I was just troubled by that very trite versions of a sort of Thomistic response to the problem of evil. I'm not saying Thomas in particular, but very common ways of addressing that. Well, God needs to paint with dark colors, and he allows evil to flourish in the world to bring a greater good out of it. That's like specifically what Yvonne and what Hart are objecting to, and I hadn't seen the flaw in that argument before. I of course came around to a thicker critique of Hart, and maybe we'll sort of touch on that
Yeah, I would
obscurely.
love to. I would love to
Yeah,
because, and not to interrupt your narrative, but I went through a similar process when I first read.
yeah,
I like David Hart. I would like to consider us friends on some level. And when I first read his book and read it a second time and a third time, I thought, I have no way to refute this. He's absolutely correct. And for a time, I just even publicly stated, I'm a universalist. I can't help
right,
it.
right,
I had an interview with David Hart. I said, I'm a universalist. I had an interview with Jordan Daniel Wood, a kind of student of Hart's. I said, I'm a universalist. But then I always had, I love the way you just put it. I always had nagging in the back of my head. I'm not supposed to be a universalist. And at
right,
first, maybe it was just some sort of Catholic guilt complex about there's
right,
these dogmas. I mean, David Hart would say, well, to hell with your dogmas. The dogmas are wrong. I can't do that.
right,
I am a Catholic. I can't do that. And there are
right.
dogmas associated with both the eternity of hell, the reality of hell, the possibility of hell. And I simply came to the conclusion I need to return to a more Balthasarian understanding of this. And so
Yeah.
I can now publicly state I am not a universalist, which kind of upset Jordan Wood a bit. He referred to me as the cat-like Larry Chapp because,
The
I
only
guess
time you've referred to as cat-like, I'm
yeah, the
sure.
only time I've ever been referred to as cat-like, but I can only presume he means by that the feline propensity to just sort of stand aloof from any commitments. I don't know. To stand aloof from all commitments,
Yeah,
surveying the situation before pouncing on something. I don't know. But no, I'm not a universalist. But anyway, I interrupted you, but I wanted to concur with your autobiographical sort of reasons for being interested in this topic. So please do go on.
sure. No, I appreciate that very much. And in fact, that when you were having those public conversations is when I was in the thick of this sort of writing. So it helped at the time to see like, nope, okay, Larry's also sort of bowled over by this argument, but what's
Yeah.
going on here? Because Hart and Wood, but Hart more specifically in his texts will respond to that sort of Roman Catholic thing, but the magisterium, and see it as this sort of being cowed by or being too timid. I
Yeah.
mean, this is what he says of Balthasar. The reason Balthasar is not a sort of out loud universalist, Hart ascribes to a certain timidity. And that's sort of what really set me off because actually spending the time in Balthazar's text that I did, he is decidedly not timid. And in fact, it was part of the structure of my own work was seeing that, okay, the universalists call him timid and the Thomists, so to speak, call him wildly progressive and heterodox. So how can he be wrong in both ways? Is he
Yeah.
wrong in both ways? Is he
Yeah.
saying what either side thinks he's saying? So that anyway was the nature of my project. Um, so back to the sort of Dostoevsky angle of it, what I came to appreciate through rereading Brothers Karamazov and engaging with Dostoevsky was that okay, if Ivan has a point, that point too is a point that God can deal with through this process that we call salvation, through the mystery of the atonement. And I found, a sort of happy bedfellow in Henri de Lubac's work on the drama of atheist humanism.
Yeah.
And de Lubac, I remembered reading it in grad school that he was really strong against Nietzsche and Schelling and Fichte and all of that, the atheists. But I'd forgotten that a big chunk of the drama of atheist humanism, this huge tome, is about Dostoevsky,
Sure is.
specifically about Dostoevsky seeing more than Nietzsche did. So that was sort of, the ingredients for the exploration was,
Stop right there. I want to recommend to all of my listeners, please go and buy from Ignatius Press, The Drama of Atheist Humanism by Henri de Lubac, an extremely important book in my own intellectual formation. Unfortunately, when I was in my early 20s and reading it, it was an earlier version of that book that didn't have everything in it. So don't be fooled by the older version. Get the more recent Ignatius Press version, and it will bowl you over. Especially all of you trads out there listening who think de Lubac was some sort of closeted Blondellian modernist, Loisian modernist,
Oh my
which
gosh.
is
Yeah.
absolute risible nonsense, especially if you read this book. But anyway, once again, I interrupted you, but go
No,
ahead.
this is great. Well, let me just share sort of in a nutshell. So in this work, The Drama of Atheist Humanism, um, de Lubac sets up the dynamic such that, okay, we all know that Nietzsche said that God is dead, but we're all willing to sort of have as our hero Dostoevsky, who has these powerful accounts of atheism and this deep sort of rooted Russian faith that also has a lot to do with the mystery of evil and the question of whether God is dead. Um, de Lubac sets up Dostoevsky as this visionary. So he precedes Nietzsche in time. But I want to read just a little bit of a passage here to sort of give a nutshell of what de Lubac thinks that Dostoevsky has
Sure.
the edge over Nietzsche on. De Lubac says that thus Dostoevsky did more than foreshadow and serve as a rough sketch for his successor. To put the matter succinctly, he forestalled Nietzsche. He overcame the temptation to which Nietzsche was to succumb. And that to me was like, okay, well, Christianity needs to be able to do that, right? Because I love Nietzsche. I know you love Nietzsche as well. There are a lot of sort of, middle-aged
He's a
white males
he's
who
an
refer to
intellectual
Nietzsche as a
purgative.
hero. Yeah, he's amazing.
He's a probiotic. He's an intellectual probiotic. He gives you good gut health.
I like that. Yeah, yeah. That is what gives Nietzsche's work its extraordinary scope. Dostoevsky's work, rather. Whoever plunges into it comes out immunized against the Nietzschean poison while aware of the greatness of Nietzsche. This is your point. Dostoevsky does not compel the reader either to close his eyes or to take fright and shrink away. He does not thrust him back to the hither side of the newly discovered regions. He carries him beyond them. Dostoevsky, too, dispels comforting illusions and cruelly rends the veils that man ceaselessly weaves in order not to see himself as he really is. But God is not, for him, one of those veils. Dostoevsky, too, condemns this world and its falsehoods. But God is not, for him, part of the machinery of this world, nor the son of a dying universe. For if it is more precisely our own age that is in question, the parallel we have recognized in the critical attitude of the two thinkers with regard to it should not make us overlook the clash between their sources of inspiration. I love this following formulation. Nietzsche, in cursing our age, sees in it the heritage of the gospel, while Dostoevsky, cursing it just as vigorously, which is why a lot of people bounce off of Dostoevsky. They can't handle the criticism. Dostoevsky, cursing it just as vigorously, sees in it the result of a denial of the gospel. In the last analysis, disagreeing as to man and as to God, they disagree just as completely on the meaning of the world and on our human history, since between them is planted the sign of contradiction.
Amen.
Amen. So, okay. So Nietzsche and Dostoevsky see the same reality, but come, so to speak, with different presuppositions. That the present state of the denial of God is a culmination of the gospel, would be Nietzsche's position. And that the present state of the death of God, the denial of God, is a sin, is a heresy against the gospel. So those two perspectives. But to view the mystery of evil in that light, de Lubac's insight here is that Dostoevsky sort of sees what Nietzsche sees, but asks a harder question and recognizes that, okay, if you can problematize the problem of evil even more, if you can reject the ticket like Ivan, God is not outwitted by that. God came precisely to solve that problem. Now, what I like about Hart and his reading of Dostoevsky is that he steelmans the problem of evil for us. I think Hart's answer to it is not adequate. This idea that with Dostoevsky in a way that the devil too is going to convert at the end of time, that the devil will be overcome. We've got obviously different angelologies going on there. But Hart sees that if evil is given a simple explanation, then it's really nothing to be overcome at all. Hart helped me to see that death really has to be overcome, that it's not a battle between good and evil, but a battle between sort of good and non-being. And that whatever we say about Christ, about the incarnation, and about the process of atonement, is that he has to come to use a Balthasarian phrase, he has to come to undergird the mystery of death. And that's why
Yes.
I'm like so grateful for Hart and for the work that he's done. But I think when you have this perspective that I think I have from this book, then you can reread someone like a Balthasar and see that no, precisely what he sees is the theodrama of death. And he therefore gives a better answer than Hart and others in this sort of universalist school. So that in a
Uh,
nutshell is sort of why the
I
approach.
I agree. I agree. It is ultimately a better answer, especially uh, with regard to one of the things that strikes me about David Hart's approach to this, and we can talk about this, whether or not my impression is accurate or not, is that embedded in Hart's universalism, and this is eventually what sent up a red flag for me, is actually a deep pessimism about human freedom.
Mm,
In a post-lapsarian state. Well, one of Hart's central claims, of course, is that how can our eternal destiny hinge upon decisions that we fallen, fallible, truncated, pinched up, messed up sinners that that the more we sin, the more compromised our freedom is, and therefore the more in need we are of actual redemption, the least capable we are of actually engaging our freedom to accept that redemption. And so Hart reaches this conclusion that therefore, this side of the grave, no such decision can be made. It must be a post mortem decision. And no human being can ultimately, in the post mortem state, resist the overtures of God's love for all eternity. It might take millions of years, but eventually that soul will be won over. So it's ultimately a rather optimistic view of human freedom, but that optimism is tainted with a very pessimistic view of freedom in our current condition and in this life.
yeah, that's extremely well said. I mean, part of the labor of doing the work that I did was discovering actually that at the root of the disagreement is a different conception of freedom. For Hart, I can't sort of the conclusion of all of this is that I came to find it very difficult to understand how Hart can sort of weight any human action with significance if no human action is truly binding. It seemed to me that he evacuates our capacity to actually commit, whether in this life or the life to come. Um,
Yeah.
I have a passage handy from him that I think explores that. And I don't want to read the whole podcast, but this is helpful to set up his
No, go
framing.
ahead.
Because you've got his powerful rhetoric, but I think this will show us the sort of chink in the armor. Um, this is the final description of the nature of freedom he gives in That All Shall Be Safe. So this is Hart
Yeah.
on freedom. Freedom consists in the soul's journey through this interior world of constantly shifting conditions and perspectives, toward the only home that can ultimately liberate the wanderer from the exile of sin and illusion. Step aside from that for a second. For Hart, there's really an almost total overlap between ignorance and sin. Because we are ignorant, because we don't know, almost everything we do is sinful, and because God
Yeah.
knows that, we're not really liable for, we can't be held accountable. Um, so back into the quote. And God, as the transcendent end that draws every rational will into actuality, never ceases setting every soul free ever and again until it finds that home. To the inevitable God, every soul is bound by its freedom. Okay, I like that. In the end, if God is God and spirit is spirit, and if there really is an inextinguishable rational freedom in every soul, evil itself must disappear in every intellect and will, and hell must be no more. Only then will God, both as the end of history and as that eternal source and end of beings who transcends history, be all in all. For God, as scripture says, is a consuming fire, and he must finally consume everything. Okay. So in order for God to be God, hell has to disappear. I mean, that's one of the cash outs of that statement.
Yeah, true.
Um, but that's presuming that our human freedom is in fact almost totally depraved. Like we cannot perform virtuous actions, it seems to me either. Um, one of the To introduce another set of terminology, one of the reasons I find this perspective ultimately problematic is that um, it begins thinking about hell in the wrong way. And this is my whole thing with Balthasar, and I think I've even talked with you about it before, but that hell is not the sort of shadowy underworld in the eschaton. And there are historical and philosophical and theological reasons we've come to picture it that way. Sheol was, as you used to call it, that the sort of skanky place, that skanky underworld,
Yeah.
the dirty place of non-communication. Death was simply the end of communication, the end of relationship, and there's no returning from it.
You see that in the Psalms. Can the
See
dead
that in the
praise you
Psalm.
and so forth? No, they can't.
Right. That's therefore an ancient and pre-Christian view of what death is.
Yeah.
But we come to actually know what hell is through Christ's conquering of death. And this is what ultimately leads me to say in the ways that I have that hell is a mystery of Christ, and Christ lets go of nothing that he's won. Just as we're very comfortable in the Christian lexicon saying that because Christ has overcome and conquered death, death is now sort of our way to salvation. I mean, that's the mechanics, so to speak, of baptism, where we die Christ's death and rise to new life. And in that, the waters that flow from that same body and are made mystical members of his flesh through the church, through Mary, our mother, all of that. It's a very incarnate, organic, fleshy way of talking about. But precisely what Christ does when he dies as man is suffers that fate for us. He takes on that condition, but in his unique condition of being the eternally begotten one, the Son, who's true God and true man, which is to say, as Balthasar sees it, that he experiences death unlike any other man would have, because he experiences death as the Son of the Father, which is to say, for us, death is something not natural, but maybe connatural. Death, we introduce death into the world. Death is part of our finite condition. But for God, death is something he doesn't know in a way. God, again, Old Testament, I hate death. I did not make death. So Christ comes to know something which is actually the absolute opposite of his eternal life. And it's only when he suffers the consequences of that and overcomes it, and then makes death his weapon, the portal for us coming into eternal life, then the church is able to talk about not just hell, but heaven and purgatory. Because when we're talking about the eschaton, we're talking about the sort of final realized state of the soul vis-a-vis atonement and salvation as such. So hell comes to be as a result of Christ's going down to the depths, this acrobatic act of love, to use Bishop Robert Barron.
Bishop Aaron says that the
Yeah,
acrobatic.
yeah, the acrobatic act of love. He sort of, from the highest, he dives down to the deepest. Beautiful imagery.
Yeah, it
Father
reminds me
Ed
of
Oak,
C.S. Lewis's imagery of Christ like a diver that delves deep down under the water and
yeah,
grabs the pearl out of the mud and brings it back up. Yeah, very
yeah,
similar image.
exactly. Father Ed Oakes, you'll like this. He talks about. I think he's just grabbing it from Balthasar, but at one point, either Oakes or Balthasar uses this German word. Christ is this great counterweight, Schwergewicht, something like that. Much like how an elevator works, where elevators are actually
Yeah.
being pulled in two directions at once. And Christ, he sort of has the counterweight of divinity. And so when he sinks down with that counterweight, he thereby raises the rest of us up in doing that. So he's therefore gone down lower than the rest of us can because he weighs more, so to speak.
Yeah.
But
But
that's the ground
stop,
for. Go ahead.
stop a sec. I mean, I want to come back to this notion, all right, that in the Old Testament, uh, there is no full-blown concept of hell. It really is a quasi-pagan, borrowed from the pagans' notion of Sheol or Hades. It's just a shadowy, skanky place of non-communication where all the dead go, both the righteous and the unrighteous. And furthermore, there is no concomitant clear notion of heaven of paradise. Of you get also the Jewish version of the Greek idea that only the kind of heroic make it into, like an Elijah gets taken up in a chariot, or an Enoch
Right.
gets taken up, or the martyrs during the Maccabean revolt are going to be resurrected from the dead or something. Only God's heroes. So it drives home the point that heaven, purgatory, hell, these eschatological realities are Christological realities. They are forged and formed in the Sacred Heart of Christ. They exist within the Christologically carved out territory of Christ's human heart on the cross. And we cannot forget that, therefore, these are not places or states independent of Christ that we can conceive of statically in an essentialized way, places of reward, places of punishment. No, these are essentially Christological states of being, which I think is your article brings, and Balthasar brings this out beautifully. Anyway, I'm sort of pontificating at this point, but go ahead.
No, I'm so glad you said that because when you have that when you see that with Balthasar, then when you hear things like Hart says of, well, only when hell is done away with can God be God. I go, hang on. I actually just discovered that God sort of founds and grounds the eschaton precisely
Yeah.
in the incarnate mystery of overcoming death. So hell is a mystery of Christ, and it's something that therefore we pass through. Now you take that perspective, and then you look at something like Jesuits Ignatian spirituality, and you find yourself, in the first week of the Ignatian spiritual exercises. Now you've got a proper home for understanding where in the life of the church you contemplate the mystery of hell. I mean, one way to sum up my objection to Hart is that actually he kind of ignores Ignatian spirituality, which has really captured something um, about the life of the mature Christian, that we don't become saints by avoiding hell or hoping that it's done away with, but precisely by contemplating the fact that Christ has suffered what I deserve in my stead. And part of Christian maturation is coming to have the appropriate sorrow for that I did this, and then he's doing this for me, and then I will do that with him, and then I will do that for others. So there's a whole transformative power actually to preserving the mystery of hell that is not about being afraid of fire and brimstone, but about precisely contemplating what Christ has won for us. But I actually think you can't do that without hell. And that's why Balthasar, even though he says all this stuff about we have a duty to hope that all be saved, that explains for me anyway why he can be just as strong as saying that the flame, the candle of apokatastasis, of the universal restoration of all, has been definitively blown out. Right. So
Yeah.
you can say at the one time that we have a duty to hope that all are saved because of this sort of tremendous counterweight that Christ is to the force of sin, the wages of which is death. Right. And you can say, and we need hell. There's no getting away from it. It may be empty, but it's there. It's a mystery of Christ. He actually shows us his love through suffering it. And part of my becoming conformed to him, you can't do an end run around hell, actually. I think that's the sort of cash out from the Ignatian element here.
Yeah. And I think even more profoundly, and you bring this out, the idea, I mean, you find in Hart this sense that, for Hart, hell is what we would call purgatory. It's temporary, it's merely purgative. It has a kind of spiritually therapeutic value in rendering us holistic and, like Humpty Dumpty, put back together again. But when at the end of the day, when all is said and done, it's just going to disappear and go away. Poof, it will have served its functional instrumentalist purpose, and then it's done. And that strikes me as very non-Christological. Now, Hart might come back and say, okay, but in your scheme, that hell is a Christological reality. And I think actually Hart would agree that hell is a Christological reality. I don't think he would deny that.
Right.
But still something temporary that Christ eventually overcomes and conquers for all. But the fact is, in our scheme, in our way of viewing things, hell isn't something evil. Hell is something good, seen as, in some sense, the necessary correlate of respect for freedom.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
It has to be viewed as a good thing. That hell, in other words, hell isn't just something God creates for the bad people and we tolerate it. And oh, geez, it's terrible that somebody went. It's actually a good thing. Hell is a good thing. And
Yeah.
that is hard for us to get our minds around.
Yeah. Let me hasten to add that there's so much that Hart says about the general Christian understanding of hell that I still agree with, in
Yeah.
the
Oh,
sense
yeah.
that
It's
where
everybody
there are
should read
straw
his
men,
book. It's
oh my
brilliant.
God, it's I mean, for me, actually, and not to equate the evils of the two or something, but for me, reading Hart it feels a lot like reading Nietzsche, where he sort of purifies me of my idols. I
Yes.
do think a lot of people should be temporarily won over by Hart's arguments, but there's a lot of confusion in the Christian tradition. Um, Massa damnata, all this stuff, and there are some open sort of
Yes.
theologia that we still need to work through. But I'm very grateful for that, and I want to preserve that.
Well,
I had
that's
another.
what I stopped there for a second because
Yeah.
I keep interrupting you, but what came through in my mind was also I just had an article published in a Substack, Jade Henrich's Substack,
Mm.
What We Need Now. It's on the problem of evil and so forth. And one of the things that I point out in there is that actually, in some ways, the two most important books of the Old Testament are the book of Genesis and the book of Job. Genesis
Yeah.
lays out the goodness of God, the goodness of creation, tells us why evil exists. But then Job deepens the conversation and says, yeah, 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 but does so much evil have to exist? Why do bad things happen to good people? Why do the scales of justice seem so out of skew? And the fact is that God's answer in the book of Job to Job is a non-answer. It's like, it's the answer of, do you understand the great mystery of creation? Do you understand my mystery? Do you understand the depths of creation? And Job has to say, no, sorry, Lord. And God says, okay, good. And I'll restore you and all that. But just be aware of your standing in things. Likewise, you look at the Psalms of lamentation. And you see that there's no answer to the problem of evil in the Psalms of Lamentation. Even Christ on the cross, quoting Psalm 22, my God, why have you forsaken me? Is a psalm of lamentation. Where the heck are you, Lord, with friends like you? Who needs enemies? I thought Israel was your chosen people. I thought we were supposed to be the big kahuna. And yet here we are trampled upon by everybody and their blind pet hamster. So can you please tell me, God, where the heck you are? Okay? And so what I like to say in this art and what I said in this article is that the Bible itself, scripture itself, revelation itself gives us permission to engage in lament, to
Yes.
engage in the doubting of bad theodicy arguments. That is ultimately the major point of the book of Job. That's the good thing about Nietzsche. That's the good thing about David Hart, is it purges us of bad theodicy arguments. The worst of which is the ontologizing of evil, what I call the cracked egg to make an omelet theory, that,
Yeah.
oh, yeah, yeah, we have to litter history with billions of dead, horribly mutilated people because God's making this beautiful omelet and a few eggs had to be cracked. So that's the value of the Psalms of Lamentation, of the book of Job, of David Hart, of Nietzsche, to purge and burn away bad theodicy arguments,
Yeah.
which then leaves bare the only real argument, which is the argument you make in this chapter, which I have now interrupted your discourse yet again.
No, this is so helpful because you're putting things in ways that I hadn't quite concretized yet, and you're spurring further thoughts too. Um, just a quick note on something, again, a little autobiographically, I go back and forth on whether I like Dante's Inferno. And it sort of waxes
Yeah,
and wanes based on where I am with Balthasarian literature and this question of evil. But it seems to me a more calm and mature perspective. I'm thinking in particular, I forget if it's Canto 3 or Canto 5, but when they see the gates of hell and the inscription on it. Lasciate ogni speranza voi che entrate, abandon hope, all ye who enter here.
yeah,
But before that, right? Justice caused my high architect to move. It seems to me there's one way that's been like dominantly read in the Christian tradition, which is that God made hell for sinners, so to speak.
yeah,
But I think the Balthasarian perspective would actually be able to sort of redeem the meaning of that and deepen it, which is that justice, namely the love of the Son for the Father, sort of giving the Father his due, which is to give the whole of yourself back. If I think of it that way, the love of the Father caused the Son to move. Justice caused my high architect to move. I think we could sort of recover or bolster or deepen if you end up having a problem with Dante. This for me sort of helps
Yeah.
bolster that. And that ties into what you were saying. I mean, Christ's lament on the cross and talk about a mystery that gets explained away in the wrong literature. While
Oh,
it was just
yeah,
sort of
yeah.
performative, he doesn't really feel abandoned, all of that. I mean,
No, because at the end of Psalm 22, after all, the psalmist says, "Yeah, but I know that God's going to save us all after all." So really, it's just Jesus reminding people things look bad now, but just you wait.
yeah. This is from Balthasar, but this is also, I think, a deeply Ratzingerian perspective. I think, especially from his chapter on Gethsemane in the second volume of Jesus of Nazareth, that we have to pay attention to really who the person is who's praying that psalm of lament on the cross. Namely, that, as I was just saying, Christ is the Son of the Father. So first of all, nothing is ever merely performative. He's not putting on a show or sort of putting on airs, demonstrating how we ought to behave. He's really living and loving as the eternally begotten one. So what's the significance then of the one who is truly son, who's more son than you and I am, who's eternally being born of the Father, experiencing and really shouting lament? Well, first of all, that's dramatic that the son is encountering something that's so opposite from him that he feels sort of lacerated, pierced, pulled, all of that. But he's crying out to the Father at this apex moment of abandonment. So he's asserting his sonship. This is Margaret Turek's point, asserting his
Yeah.
sonship in this moment of crisis. And this is Turek's point too. That is sort of the core of redemption's work being done, asserting sonship in the midst of the consequences of sin. That, it seems to me, is what Dostoevsky sees that Nietzsche didn't see, namely that it's the Son of the Father who's doing all of this, who cries out in lament, this biblical lament of abandonment, this being caught in this friction of ontological love for the Father, if I could put it that way, and
Yeah.
total solidarity with man. That's precisely what stretches him. And it's in that moment that he cries out. Yes, he cries out in lament and abandon. Why have you abandoned me? But he cries out to his Father because he knows he'll be heard. Balthasar is so good
Yes.
on this. He's willing to say,
Yes.
no, he's really crying out. He really feels this way. And he's crying out. It's dereliction. So this is the sort of subheading of these major parts in Balthasar's work. It's dereliction for sure, but as a mode of union. And that's the part where Balthasar is really sort of pushing theology
Okay,
forward.
stop right there. Dereliction as a mode of union.
Dereliction as a
Kenosis,
yes,
kenosis, and descent into hell as the greatest act of love, the greatest act of divine unity, the greatest act of divine conquest and glory, the coming together. It's very Johannine, the coming together of glory and kenosis. That comes out so clearly
that's
in
right.
Balthasar.
That's right. That's right. And I think, I mean, in the end, my point in the article that we're talking about is really simple. It's that if you can ask the questions that Dostoevsky does, or Nietzsche does, or Hart does, then when you look at the atonement, you can see very simply new layers to what God has done for us. It's not just that a good man was put to death for us, it's that he suffered in a way that's unavailable to you and me until we unite ourselves to it, because he's given us the renewed capacity to do that as members of his body. And so it also reveals that, to put it in a super nutshell, hell becomes this new mystery of communion, which is totally bizarre. But that, it seems to me, is
Yeah.
actually what we
Yeah.
mean when we say that death has been overcome by death. Death is now not this sort of final severance of us from communion with God and our brothers. Death is now this place where we are united to all, and that's precisely what we mean by God overcoming it, not just sort of annihilating it. He
Yeah.
conscripts death in his service. In much the same way, being united with Christ in hell is precisely part of the path to sanctity for all of us, I think, in small ways, and for some of us, sort of writ large. Um,
And that there's no sin that Christ hasn't outstripped, no sin he hasn't underwritten, no sin he hasn't forgiven and suffered through. No matter how fast and far away from God we run, when we
Yeah.
stop to catch our breath, look up from the ground, there will be Christ standing there smiling at us. Beat you, you know.
Yeah,
It's
that's
just like,
beautiful.
wow, okay, and I'm going to start running again. Yeah, it's amazing, and it just underscores the fact that hell is Christ's hell. Uh, that hell is not something outside of God, outside of Christ. That it is a Christological reality, as you point out. Look, what would you say to those traditionalists?
Mm.
Much on my mind these days as I'm working on my book on modernism, because to trads, everyone's a modernist,
Mhm.
except for Gary Goulagrange. He's the only non-modernist that we should pay attention to.
Yeah.
Uh, uh, what would you say to those types who point at Balthasar's two aspects that come out in your article that critics of Balthasar's orthodoxy love to point out? Number one is Balthasar's belief that Christ descended into the hell of the damned. All right. Or better to say that Christ creates the hell of the damned by descending into the hell of the damned. But they say, well, that's the harrowing of hell. I mean, Alyssa Pitstick wrote a whole book about this. The
Yeah.
harrowing of hell does not mean descent into the hell of the damned and so forth. And this is heretical, what Balthasar. The other thing that they point to is heretical, which is really a linchpin of so much of Balthasar's belief about the obedience of the Son in the face of the Father's will, that he suffer for the sake of sin, take on sin, and so forth, is the notion that even if Christ had the beatific vision, that it
Mhm.
was not some sort of constant blissful image of the heavenly realm constantly before his mind's eye, so that there was no ignorance in Christ, none whatsoever, that his human psychology was so elevated, so suffused with the hypostatic union, that he constantly had this celestial vision before his eyes. And Balthasar denies that and says, no, he did not have that. If he had that, then his human psychology would not have been our psychology. It would have
Yeah.
been something different. What would you say to those who criticize both this notion of the descent into the hell of the damned and Balthasar's denial that Christ had this sort of cartoonish vision of the beatific vision? And I call
Yeah.
it cartoonish.
No, I agree with you. Those are you're right. Those are the frequent objections, and they're in a way they're the difficult ones. Although I have to say this, I mean, part of the reason I set out on doing this dissertation and now the forthcoming book is that I wasn't sure that anybody had read Balthasar well enough on these questions, because I
Right.
thought that I understood him and I wasn't encountering secondary literature that sort of attacked the arguments as I thought that he made them. In particular, on the question of hell. So maybe I'll just explain a little bit of the Balthasarian perspective on the relationship between
Please. Oh,
death.
that's why I brought all this up. That's what I want you
Yeah,
to
because
do.
I think the question comes about in one way as a result of a misunderstanding of what he means. So when the Apostles' Creed says that Christ descended into hell, the Latin in translation is descendit ad inferos, which is more literally translated as descended to the dead. Now, in the ancient world, inferna indicated the general underworld, which is not yet the realm of eternal damnation. So the two different things.
Yeah.
But one cash out of all of this, and Balthasar makes this point in a lot of great places too, puts it really well. Um, Genuine atheism, genuine damnation is possible only after Christ, because now there's a sort of face that you're personally, a face that's died for
That's
you that you're
right.
personally rejecting. So it's a category error to assume that underworld means damnation, right? We're sort of mixing our languages and categories here. But that general netherworld, which is not yet the realm of eternal damnation, but for us, when we hear hell, we're hearing the realm of eternal damnation. So that's inferna, but whereas inferos comes from a different root than inferna, and it referred more basically to the dead. So the cash out of this is that the Latin of the Apostles' Creed means most basically not descent into capital H hell in English, but descended to the dead. Okay. In Pharos, it just indicates a realm of the dead, which was conceptually equivalent to the Hebrew Sheol, which itself is equivalent to the Greek Hades. So Sheol, Hades realm of the dead, all kind of the same thing. And that's what we're saying. That's what the Apostles' Creed has said from the time of the Apostles' Creed, that Christ truly dies, right? The Apostles' Creed thus indicates that Christ doesn't enter hell, capital H hell, but Sheol or Hades, the netherworld where the dead now reside. That, again, just ancient views of the underworld, good or bad alike, you're in the underworld. And there might be demarcations, there might be the Elysian fields and so on, but everybody's in this zone of non-communication with the living and with the gods. It's all just a shadowy underworld. And if you're separated, there's no cross communication among the realms and so on. That's specifically the realm of myth when we get those stories. The realm that we come to speak of as hell, which is differentiated from Sheol or Hades, that comes into the lexicon only as a reality as a result of Christ's death. So hell is a separate new thing from Sheol or Hades. Now Gehenna is in the mix too. Gehenna is a Greek adaptation of a Hebrew name, Gehinnom, the valley of Hinnom, which is a particular place. But Gehenna is a name used in the New Testament to refer to the realm of unrepentant sinners. So even then, it's a sort of Hebrew demarcation of the underworld, the unrepentant.
Yeah.
For Balthasar, those distinctions are sort of more than merely linguistic. And he criticizes Aquinas's treatment of Christ's descent to the dead on this basis. So Aquinas asked whether Christ descended into the hell of the damned. And Aquinas responds by saying that the soul of Christ had effect on all of the inhabitants of the underworld, including the damned, those in purgatory, and the righteous patriarchs who dwell in the bosom of Abraham, while, Aquinas holds, in its essence, the soul of Christ visited only the Holy Fathers. So he had effect on just about everything, but he visited only the Holy Fathers, so the abode of the righteous dead. Balthasar's point, and what I don't see people refuting, because I don't think they see it, for Balthasar, this sort of question is just so far wrongly posed. It's a sort of category error. There was neither hell as Gehenna, nor purgatory, nor heaven prior to Christ's death. And that's his point. Death
Exactly.
is simply this severance of communication, and that's what Christ enters into. And we can be comfortable saying in the English translation, Christ descended into hell, if we sort of know that what we mean by that is that Christ truly dies. And this is where his book, Mysterium Pascale, the
Gosh.
mystery of the 3 days,
Yeah, stop
is.
that. I mean, this is why I brought this up. It just so galls me when I hear people say, "Well, Balthasar taught Christ descended into the hell of the damned." It's like, oh, gosh, you don't understand.
No such thing until he does that.
Exactly. You don't understand what you're talking about. There is no hell of the damned until the cross and so forth. And yeah, it might say as Aquinas say, his effects are there. And so, but Balthasar's not saying, even at one point, you quote Balthasar in here. I don't want to turn to it, where Balthasar says, in some sense, distance from God, hell, damnation implies hatred of God. And certainly that kind of hell is not what we're talking about with regard to Christ's descent to sinners. It's certainly not what hatred of God and so forth. So
Yeah.
this is why I wanted you to comment on this, Daniel, because it is just such a category error here
Yeah.
that people engage. In fact, when you read Mysterium Pascale, and I'm going to let you talk again in a second,
Oh, you're fine. You're fine.
it answers the question in a sense. Well, what was Christ doing on Holy Saturday? And the answer is he wasn't doing anything
Being
other
dead.
than being in solidarity with the dead. Balthasar emphasizes over and over and over again the passivity of death. That death is something that happens to us, that overwhelms us, that we have no control over. Now, Christ embraces his death in the sense of
Yeah.
it's necessary as part of his mission. But what he embraces for Verlassenheit is a Gelassenheit, a letting be, as simply letting be of this action which now comes over him. And now his death is a solidarity with the silence of the dead.
That's right. That's right. And that, I mean, there's where Balthasar's whole Johannine perspective is so helpful, because you can think of plenty of places in John's gospel. But I mean, the chief one for me. So, yes, Christ is murdered on the cross. Yes, death is a passive experience, but he consecrates himself to it in advance. No one takes my life from me. I lay it down of my own accord. This is why when Turek
Yes.
writes about it in Atonement, she calls Christ's death a love death. Yes,
Yes.
it's the profound state of passivity, of being dead. What's he doing? He's being dead. right? But he's being dead as the son of the father with this eternal love, and so it's an active passivity
It's
and a passive
action. It's
activity. I
once
mean, all of
again the just
yeah,
the coming together, the coinciding of all of these
yeah,
alleged binaries and polarities,
that's right.
passivity versus action, contemplation versus action. All of those are overcome.
That's right. And now, let me just say, as a scholar, if someone wants to take Balthasar to task on that account of things, if he's wrong in his reading of those ancient categories and of the linguistic distinctions, like I would love to learn that, and I would love to be able to
Sure.
address it and so on. But it seems to me that really no one's seeing that that's the case he's making. And instead, they get caught on Balthasar saying something different from Aquinas about a matter of importance and saying, therefore, heterodox. And I just think that Balthasar actually makes some really good critiques of Aquinas. And that if this is a category error, then I can be very comfortable walking with Balthasar a little bit further on this road of the
Yeah.
descent of Christ to the dead. Yeah.
Yeah. What about the beatific vision and the
Yeah.
psychology of the human mind of Christ?
It does seem to me, I mean, one Balthasar guy to another, that if there's any part of Balthasar's theological work that I'm willing to give a little bit more wiggle room on, it's any of the psychologizing. Now, I'm the first person to defend being as gift and the mystery of the mother's smile and all of that, and things that are
Yeah.
reliant on the sort of mystery of child development and human psychology. Um, if a strong case came up, I'd be willing to argue it. I do think he's right. So I'm not trying to sort of couch or
Yeah.
be cat like, but just to say that I do. If there's a squishier area, like maybe this is one of them. However, let me state Balthazar's case a little bit. Um, Actually, the best person I like on this argument is Father Tom Weinandy, who has
Oh
gone back
yeah,
and forth
Tom.
for like
Tom's
a
great.
decade and a half.
Yeah.
He was Nick Healy's director, so he's my grand doctor father, I guess. Um, Weinandy has gone back and forth with Thomas Joseph White for decades over this question of the beatific vision. And similar to the prior case I just made, Weinandy looks at the question of beatific vision, and he recognizes that, well, hang on a second. In our tradition, in Aquinas, beatific vision is descriptive of the vision that the saints have of God in heaven. And he says, when I look at Christ, we're not dealing with a human saint specifically. We're dealing with the only begotten Son. So does the category of beatific vision apply to him? Is there not something more like, in what he calls it, filial vision? And that is where, pairing Weinandy's reframing of the category with Balthasar's argument that um, what Christ knows in the incarnation from any moment, from moment to moment, what he knows is, first of all, mediated through this from the Father through the Spirit. So Christ is led in his incarnate mission by the Spirit. So there's the
Yeah.
Trinitarian, uh, what does he call it? I lost my phrase.
Inversion. The
Trinitarian
Trinitarian
inversion. Yeah.
inversion.
That's all he means by it, is that we see in the
Yeah.
Gospels that the Spirit mediates the mission from the Father to the Son, rather than what you would think of the Son
Yeah.
sending the Spirit.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, Balthasar's point is that mission is the condition of Christ's sort of moment to moment knowledge. He's
Yes.
always there to do the will of the Father, and he knows and does what's necessary to do the mission at that moment, which allows Balthasar to set up this dynamic where Christ knows all things as the Son and in the human mode of that Son, which is to say, in manners appropriate to human intelligence, the human capacity for knowing particulars, and that therefore things can be gradually revealed to him without saying simply that he's ignorant at some grand level, that there are particulars that are not yet revealed, but that what he comes to know in line with the vision as it's revealed to him. This is how Balthasar helps us to unpack the in Gethsemane, him sweating blood and being in shock, that this is the moment, he's there
Yeah.
to do the mission. There's no hesitation, but that there's a real horror of okay, this is the form that this mission takes. And I just think Balthasar's explanation of that accounts for more than the fact that, well, Christ really knew everything. And oh yeah, he comes to know by experience.
Well,
I've never
yeah.
found it satisfying.
It comes to know. I just read an article in Communio. I think I did a podcast with somebody. The whole thing was about whether or
Yes.
not
Yeah.
Christ can learn from experience. Or, I mean, this is in Aquinas, that he can learn from experience, but not from a human teacher.
Right.
Aquinas says nobody, no human being can teach Christ anything that he doesn't already know. But Christ himself can somehow mysteriously, because Luke says he grew in age and in wisdom. Well,
Yeah. Yeah.
wisdom, what does it mean for the Son of God to grow in wisdom? Well, it means that Christ himself in his human psychology gradually deepened his understanding of things. Well, that seems to me to be a bit strange. I remember reading C.S. Lewis years ago when he talks about the scene where the woman with the hemorrhage touches the hem of Christ's garment in a big crowd, and Christ turned around and says, "Who touched me?" Now there are Thomists who would say that, well, that was a mere pedagogical question, that Jesus knew who touched him,
Didn't want to
but what
frighten them by saying that he
didn't
knew
want
where
to
she.
frighten anybody and wanted to test the faith of the woman involved. And so, no, you know what? In a strictly theoretical sense, that might be true. It might be true. But I agree with Lewis when Lewis says, actually, I would prefer to think that he genuinely wanted to know
Yeah. Yeah.
because he didn't know, and he wanted to know who had touched him. Uh, does that
And even
is
there,
that
it's a subtle balance because I believe that scripture says, knowing that power went out from him, he
yeah,
asked, "Who touched me?" So there's a sense of like he knows that he's been distributed, but the who question is sort of secondary, which I
yeah,
think matches the Balthasarian vision of like, I am here to be poured out. What's that look like from moment to moment? It's a far more, to my mind, a natural. The idea that Christ would not learn from a human teacher, just on the face of it, seems very docetic to me, that he sort of seems human.
yeah.
And he's sort of playing along. What a freakish
Well,
child that.
yeah, and the article I read about on this, gosh, I wish I could remember the author. It was a Communio author too, and I apologize to whoever it was because they were on my podcast, and now I don't remember. But it was one of the points was, what a denigration of the importance of the Mother of God. What a
Right.
denigration of the importance of the Mariological, of the Holy Family as such, as the pedagogical home of the young boy Jesus. I'm sure as soon as we're done with this podcast, I'm going to remember the author of that article.
Yeah, me
Maybe
too. I read it and I watched the
maybe
interview
I'll
too.
put it. I might put it in the show notes here that are like, okay, here's the article I'm talking about. But in other words, to bring it back to our main point, I'm not opposed to the idea that Jesus had some semblance of what we would call the beatific vision. I believe that he had a self identity, that he understood his identity as this, as God, that he was God incarnate, whatever that meant. I think that he came at it indirectly, though I agree with Balthasar, through his sense of mission. This is how he grew in wisdom. As he grew up, he began to understand the nature of his mission more and more and more as he learned more of his Judaism, of the
Yeah.
scriptures, of the truths about God, and then put that in the light of his own mission. I think at some point he realizes, dear Lord in heaven, I'm God. I mean, I
Right,
could to
right.
put it crudely. Uh, and obviously, since he was sinless, it would not have come as this existential shock that discombobulated him. It
Right.
would have been an easy affirmation. I am okay. I am God. But nevertheless, that could be construed in some sense as Christ having the beatific vision. In other words, what my opposition is to this as I said, this cartoonish sort of thing, so that while Jesus is by the Sea of Galilee eating a piece of fish with his apostles, he's also at the same time very self-consciously making sure that the moons of Jupiter don't crash into Jupiter or something like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and Mary is his mother, and the Magnificat is her prayer. So certainly that child would grow up knowing that he's the child of the promises, the
Yes.
fulfillment of the historical narrative. And so
Yes.
does that automatically mean our 1950s sense of God consciousness? That no, absolutely not. He's God as the Son. And that means that everything he receives is from the Father. And in the incarnation, that being from the Father is mediated through the Spirit. And there's particular moments where we see that happen. He's led into the desert at his baptism, the theophany, the transfiguration. There are
Yeah.
clear
Yeah.
moments of sort of concretization, crystallization, actualization of the mission. Um, but he's thoroughly human the whole time. the
Yeah,
God, the
yeah.
man, the
And it has
God,
to,
in the Maximian sense.
and
And
as we
so,
analyze the tradition and go through it carefully, we need to constantly be aware of the subtle remaining Platonic threads of the divided line between
yeah,
spirit and matter that continues to wield its influence on the thinking of both the fathers and then the medievals, so that there really was this squeamishness about affirming the full humanity of Christ, the full kenotic elements of the incarnation, what it means truly in the radical sense for God to become a human being. And we then get a sense, too, of the revolution introduced by someone as simple as St. Francis of Assisi with regard to his promotion of the nativity creche, the manger scene. There was actually a resistance among some to so portray God in that
yeah,
vulnerable, but Francis of Assisi was the one who then popularized this devotion to the humanity of Christ. And this has to be constantly kept in view. There was this divided line taint in the
yeah,
thinking of so many of the fathers and the medievals.
yeah. That Franciscan emphasis, I mean, talk about the heights of mysticism and angelic visitation and so on. And you have the simplicity of the creche. So there's something, yeah, something so
Yeah.
beautiful about
And
Franciscan
and
spans.
Wine Andy was a Franciscan, so there you
That's
go.
right.
So
That's
Tom,
right.
if you're listening, big shout out to Tom Wine. I've had him on the podcast too. Tom Wine Andy, great guy. If you get
One of
any
my
of this,
heroes.
yeah, absolutely. So anyway, okay, we've been at this a little over an hour. We should probably wrap this up.
Hmm.
Uh, there's got is there? Let me shut up and see if there's a new direction that you wish to take this conversation in the last 10 minutes or so that we have.
No, I autobiographically again, this whole exploration came about because I came across a lecture by I think he's a philosopher, might have been a linguist, by the name of Merrill Westphal, who had this great lecture, I want to say 2012, 2013. You can find it on YouTube, called Try Atheism for Lent. And Westphal's, the whole lecture is, look, it's tough, gird your loins, but spend some time with Freud, with Nietzsche, with Fichte, with Hegel, and deepen your faith thereby. And that, just to say, I find in trad circles sometimes a certain reluctance to engage with the Russian soul
Oh yeah.
for reasons that are good for the most part. But and Dostoevsky, it's not an easy read in any sense of it. But I would just genuinely encourage, if there are Christians,
Yeah.
if you feel like you've plateaued, both in sort of theological understanding, but particularly in devotion, let yourself be unsettled a little bit by exposure to this literature. So try Atheism for Lent is kind of
Yeah.
my message there. Read the
And,
Brothers Karamazov. That's a sure guide.
And when you're done with that, go and buy Jenny Martin's book on the influence of the Russian sociologist on
Oh,
Balthasar's
good.
thinking. Jenny Martin is a genius, an absolute genius. I love her stuff. I've had her on the show too. Uh, but I do think of one thing that I want to talk about here, and I
Yeah.
want to go back to David Hart because
Mm.
I doubt David's listening to this, but if he is, I can hear him screaming in the background that we've ignored one of the most important arguments that he brings forward, and that all shall be saved. In many ways, the main argument he presents isn't so much a theological argument as it is a moral argument
Mhm.
as applied to God. And one of the things he constantly objects to in the book is this notion of appealing to, well, God's ways are not our ways, so the appeal to mystery. And he goes, that's true, but our notion of reason and fairness and the moral law cannot be utterly equivocal. There is an analogical moment. Well, otherwise, why do we have a moral sense? Why do we have reason? Why do we have moral reason? Our notion of the good cannot be so radically different from that of God that we're not allowed to use it in adjudicating these theological questions. So he says, as we apply moral reasoning to God's decision to create, we have to affirm that the end is implied in the beginning. And therefore, because God knows from all eternity who is going to be damned and who is not, why would God bring into existence, in an act of ex nihilo creation of a new soul in an embryo, why would God bring a person that he knows is going to be damned into existence? Hart's conclusion would be, should God bring such a soul into existence, God is complicit in the evil of that soul's damnation. And therefore, I think this is why Hart would say that's why hell has to eventually not exist for God to exist. I think
Yeah.
that's the linchpin of his argument. And that's actually the argument initially that got me, where I
Yep.
realized, oh, geez, there's no way to For example, I once said this to someone I was debating about whether or not hell is populated. This was a typical trad arguing against Balthasar's hope for an empty hell. And the trad says, well, what about Jesus saying to Judas, better that this person was never born? To which I said to the trad, well, then why was he born? That would be David Hart's.
Yeah. Yeah.
Obviously, my point would be when Jesus is better that that person was never born, he's engaged in a sort of typical Jewish idiomatic hyperbolic statement. Kind of like my mom would say when I did something wrong, you do that again, and I'll make sure you'll regret you were born. That kind of thing. Now I don't want to ascribe that kind of thing to our Lord and Savior, but
Mhm.
nevertheless to say, well, hell is populated because Jesus says this about Judas, I think is a bit of a stretch. But nevertheless, my point stands. If
Yeah.
let's take Jesus literally here, where he says, better that Judas had never been born, Hart's question would be, well, then why was he?
Yeah. Yeah. I'll give how I reconcile these things, and I won't pretend that that's going to be satisfactory for
Yeah.
everybody. And I'm still working on this, and could come around
Me
to
too.
different.
Me too.
But two things. So, one, to just defend Balthazar on one score, hell is populated for him. He's actually got a stronger sort of sense of the finality of demonic action than many would presume, because they don't get that
Yeah.
far in his
Yeah. It's not empty.
Satan
The
and the
demons.
demons. There's no
Yeah.
redemption. Now, whether or not they're persons is an interesting question, but whatever they are, it's not redeemable. So hell is populated for him. I mean, to put it that way.
Yeah.
Now, I'm very tempted when asked the Judas question to rely on the fact that Christ says that before he performs the mystery of our salvation, that it's something he says that, and then he goes and acts by dying for the sins of all. So yes, we should sort of be horrified and existentially struck by that reality. It'd be better that this one not be born. But the one who says that is the Son who then goes and descends into solidarity with the dead and is raised from the dead. So I think it's a misread to take it with such finality, because there is a rather decisive difference, and our whole tradition has recognized this, between pre and post resurrection Jesus. Um,
Exactly. And this is not dispensationalism as such. We're not talking about different dispensations and different covenants reigning in different dispensations. We're just talking about the fact, yeah, there is a
yeah.
difference between the focus and the message of Christ to the people of Israel during his earthly ministry and then the post-resurrection reality of Christ. We've always
The other thing,
recognized that.
right? And in John's accounting of things, I mean, talk about upping the ante. Christ says to Judas, "What you're going to do, do it quickly." It's one of the only times he's in a hurry in the Gospel of
Yeah.
John. I mean, it takes him 3 days to get to Lazarus. I mean, he's slow
Yeah.
walking that thing for reasons. But what he says to Judas, "What you're going to do, do it quickly." He sort of subsumes Judas's whole thing in his mission, and then he
Yeah.
dies for Judas. Now, I'm not saying, oh, therefore our whole tradition of reflecting on Judas, but I actually think we can't, as Roman Catholics, assume that if there's one guy, it's Judas, and if there's two guys, it's Judas and Hitler. Like I don't think I think there's a far more of an aporia there. And we
Three
didn't
guys,
want to
Jews,
for
Judas,
theology.
Judas, Hitler, and the unrepentant thief on the cross. Those are
Yeah.
the three dudes that are in hell. Whatever. Yeah, I mean, and Hart's argument stands. I mean, it stands
Yeah.
as a deep mystery. And
Well,
my response would be this: going back to our conversation about hell ultimately being a good thing as the in a sense the necessary correlate of the beauty of freedom and free choice, that in some sense it is better to exist even if damned than never to have existed at all. and that may be the case. And there's also the case. I was reading a book by Pierre Monnet Manon on Pascal. I did a podcast with Paul Seaton on this.
Oh yeah,
And
great book.
there's a line in Pascal's, I mean, in Monet's book on Pascal, where Monet says that at the heart of the Christian evangel, at the heart of the Christian gospel, is the fundamentally and the constitutive assertion that freedom is able to resist grace.
Yeah,
And I think that ultimately that ability of freedom to resist grace is something that Hart would deny, that in the long stretch of eternity, that's not possible in the long run.
right.
But I think that's a question begging on the part of how does David Hart know that? I don't know
Well, not,
how does he understand the full depths of the mystery of human freedom and its ability to resist grace? I don't think Hart does. And the entirety of the gospel seems to imply that it is possible. I mean, there's a theodrama there, you
right.
know, that freedom can resist grace. And therefore, I'm wondering sometimes, is not Hart's argument somewhat closer to the Inquisitor than to Christ? Is Hart's argument not that we are freighting human freedom with too much cargo? You know, and that
Yeah,
now
yeah,
we need
I think so.
now we need to throw the cargo off the train and realize that there is no freedom train after all, that it's all a bit of an illusion, that we're not really free at all. We're not free for virtue, as you said earlier, as well as for there's no such thing as a mortal sin. There's also no such thing, therefore, as sainthood or sanctity, or great heroic virtue. I don't know. Maybe Hart would say that's a false equivalence, but I don't know. These are just all sort of ruminations in my brain. I
Yeah,
don't know
yeah.
what
And
you
you
think.
know, I write better than I speak, so I'm excited for the book to come out because I do hope that Hart and Father Thomas Joseph White, I hope it comes across their desk and I'm able to get, decimated by their critiques. I would love that.
Oh,
I'd
yeah.
love to see what they say about it. I
If
want to
if
make a
Hart's
stronger case.
listening to this, I'm sure I'm going to get
Yeah.
an email from him say this is why you're full of shit as usual, chap. See, this is something else people don't understand. David Hart is actually a great, great guy. And people mistake his invective, his polemic, his fire. Well, that's the dumbest, stupidest bullshit argument I've ever seen in my entire. Only a moron would believe that. Only a moral barbarian would
Moral
accept
cretin.
such
Yeah,
a moral cretin, and so on and so forth. Well, he actually means all that, but he means it in a deeply sensitive and loving way. If that
he doesn't
makes
want you to
any
be a moral cretin or a barbarian.
no, no, actually, Hart is a powerful intellect, but an even more powerful human being. Go and read his book, The Roland and Moonlight, which is about,
Oh
told
man.
from the perspective of a dog. Nobody
Yeah.
that loves dogs as much as David Hart does could be soulless because, dogs are a great gift from God to humanity. All this is just simply a way. Nothing we have said should be construed as in any way, shape, or form a denigration of our dear friend David Hart because he is a profound Christian soul.
That's right. And where I've written about him, I mean, it really ends in a questioning of I just don't understand. My final questions to Hart, so to speak, are I don't actually understand the role that Christ plays in redemption. If man
Yeah,
really can't really commit evil that merits death, then what does Christ do for us? Because it seems to me essential that he dies and overcomes death and conscripts death in his service. So did we merit it or not? Did we merit death and what does Christ overcome for us? And I actually wrote to him once and asked that, and he said, that the answer was the first third of the beauty of the infinite, and I wasn't convinced by that. I also am not convinced that he's a good reader of Balthasar on the text that I've cited,
I
and that
I
was
agree.
the work of the
I agree.
dissertation.
I don't think
Um,
he is. I don't think
yeah,
he is. I
for that
think
matter,
that
Dennis Turner's critiques of Balthasar in his recent book on Dante's Inferno, I think he's a bad reader of Balthasar as well. I didn't get to take that up in the
well,
dissertation, but
like
really important.
another bad reader of Balthasar is Karen Kilby, who a lot of people cite. Oh, she really took Balthasar down. No, she's a really uncharitable reader of Balthasar, and I think a bad reader of Balthasar. I want to return to David Hart too. One of the
Yeah.
differences between our view and Hart's, and I talked to David C. Schindler about this one time.
Mm.
Hart conceives of eternity more along the lines, really, of a kind of chronological immortality. than he does with a kind of singularity of nounness, if you want to put it that way. He does
Yeah.
envision eternity as, in some sense, endless duration of time. Now, anthropologically speaking, he might be onto something in the sense that, by definition, human beings are beings that are spatio-temporal. And therefore, it is hard to imagine a human existence that doesn't have what Balthasar even would call supratemporality.
Right. It'll be more timey than rather than less timey,
Yeah,
whatever,
yeah,
whatever,
exactly. More timey, not less timey.
whatever that
Maybe
means.
that's all that heart means. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. He remains invaluable. I've read every word he's written and benefited from it tremendously. I just think he's misread Balthasar, and I think that misreading is tied up with a distinctly non-Thomistic Balthasarian account of the meaning of freedom, and it raises for me a whole host of Christological questions that I think
Yeah,
Balthasar
me
answered
too.
better. Yeah,
I do too. And but it's one of those grand modern theological discussions that should go forward. And one of the reasons why I'm so hard on trads, even though I have so many trad friends, and I like trads actually, because we all should, in some sense, as Catholics, be traditionalists, right?
yeah, yeah,
Tradition actually means something important. But there is in a sense of obtuseness, a sense of unfairness, a sense of an overly narrow, constricted, and harsh understanding of heresy versus faith and so forth that doesn't completely understand the theological project and these
that's right.
great theological debates and the role of speculative theology from some of these great minds in moving the debate forward. I mean, like you said earlier, if Balthasar ends up being wrong about the beatific vision, fine, he's wrong. If he ends up being wrong about the descent into, fine, he's wrong. People sometimes think, oh, you're a Balthasarian, so you've got this dog in the fight, and you're turf conscious, and you got to protect your grand leader. No,
Yeah,
I disagree with Balthasar on many things, actually.
yeah. I
You
just want to
know,
make sure that we're disagreeing over what he actually said. I'm not
yeah,
sure we're there yet on this question.
that's exactly right. Let's at least get him right. Let's at least
Yeah,
get his project right. And let's at least acknowledge that he is a man of profound theological insight whose system of thought is a great gift to the church. John Paul II certainly loved it. Ratzinger loved it. De Lubac loved it. It's a great gift to the church, and we need to pay attention to it, and it's not modernist to like von Balthasar.
no, no, he embraces the world and its vocabulary in order
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
speak the gospel to it, I think. Yeah.
Anyway, well, maybe we've beaten this horse enough. Danny, I always know you as Danny, so I'm sorry.
As you
Dr.
should.
Drain.
Amen. No,
Dr.
no.
Drain. For those listening, what year did you graduate from DeSales?
I was there 2011 to 2014. So
2011 to
your last
2014.
year teaching. I was in the last
That's right.
class.
You were in my
Yeah.
last lecture, which was pretty lame. I went in there hoping to say all these profound things, and then I got in there and realized I don't really have anything to say that's all that profound. And I kind of floundered around in my last lecture, I remember. It was more just emotion than anything. Uh, but yeah, 2011, 2014. And you were there during the heyday of Rodney Hauser and I running Communio study circles
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
all
The end
that.
of the Appenhauser show. Well, I guess you've got a digital incarnation now, but
Yeah, and now Hauser's down in Florida,
that's right.
which I
He's
hate him
writing the
for.
forward to my book, so we'll finally have our names together in
Oh,
print.
fantastic. And who is
Yeah.
publishing your book and when is it coming out?
It'll be out Whip and Stock. They're Pickwick Publications. The editor has it now. I won't get edits back until later this spring. So there's a chance midsummer, but probably early fall. It'll be out. Saving Finite Freedom, um, Hope, Salvation, and Freedom in Hans Urs von Balthasar's Theology of
All
Redemption.
right.
Something.
And we'll end too with another plug for the brilliant Margaret Turek and
Yes.
her book, her edited text here, The Mystery of the Atonement. Also, get Margaret's original book from Ignatius Press, simply called The Atonement, which is pure genius. So, Margaret, if you're listening, a big shout out to you. Anyway, Danny, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you, Dr. Chapp.
This was fun. See you soon, buddy.
All right. See you.
Bye.